Today is January 16th, 2016, and you're looking at episode 26 of At Percussion. With me, as always, are Laurel Black.
Hi.
Ben Charles.
Everybody.
And we're missing Megan Arntz today. I believe she's got some family things to do, all fun things. Everything's good and happy. So, Megan, we miss you. We'll see you again soon. And our guest this week is Associate Professor of Percussion at Mississippi State. He's Principal Timpanist of the North Mississippi Symphony Orchestra and Associate Editor of Percussive Notes. He's also served as past President of the Mississippi Percussive Arts Society chapter. So, everyone, please welcome Dr. Jason Baker. How's it going, Jason?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, our pleasure. Hey, how is your CD coming? I listened to the take of my piece, which is called Opening, and it just sounds fantastic. So tell us a little about the CD.
Well, thank you. This is a CD called Midsummer Songbook, and we recorded it last weekend, and we recorded it on the campus of Mississippi State. And we're looking to release in the next couple of weeks. We've been mixing and editing all of this week, kind of getting all of that together. I'm going to finish up some final details and then hopefully have that out by the 1st of February.
What else is on the CD?
It opens with a piece called From the Manor to the Heights, which I composed. Goes to your solo for marimba called Opening, which we commissioned of you for the Mississippi chapter of PAS a couple of years back.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And from there it goes to a vibraphone piece. A friend of mine named Jason Barr, who's down at Florida Gulf Coast University. It's actually a movement of a larger work that he wrote for solo vibraphone. The title of the movement is The Light Shines in the Darkness. It's a short, probably 3-minute movement. And after that, a commission that I had, or actually a piece that I commissioned a composer named Frank Piccarazzi, who's an old friend of mine. He lives up in Brooklyn. He's a vibraphonist, drum set player, and composer by trade. Really original voice. I've loved his music for a long time, and wanted to take an opportunity to try to expose as many people to it as possible. Very, very interesting and cool. And then the CD closes with a snare drum solo of mine named Palm Sunday, which was commissioned of me a number of years ago by Eric Willey, who's now at Greensboro. And so it's a number of pieces that either I commissioned myself, or I was involved somehow in the commissioning of, or I composed myself, and kind of constitutes the body of what I've been playing for the past year or so. So I'm turning 40 this year, so I wanted to take an opportunity to sort of document what I'm doing right now. So yeah, we recorded it last Saturday, all in one day, and I was fortunate enough to have some really cool people on board with me, a man named Kerry Huser, who's a recording engineer down here in Starkville, Mississippi, and a student of mine, Kevin West, who's a senior and has really incredible ears, and also is the type of guy like Kerry who doesn't mind putting in a 9 or 10 hour day, listening really intensely and giving me feedback. So it was very cool. And I was able to do a lot of this with the support of a grant that I got from the Mississippi Arts Commission. So very thankful for all of those resources and all of those people who agreed to be involved with me.
Hey, did you ever have the thought, and I only ask because we've talked about it on the episode recently with the Beatles going all streaming. This is like the 3rd time I've brought this up. Mm-hmm. So sorry, everybody. But
we found one topic, and I know, so he has to bring it up all the time.
I know these guys do new topics every week. I read one like little article in the New York Times, and I'm using it for like 5 episodes. So sorry about that. But did you ever have a moment where you wondered, okay, should I really make a CD, or should I just do all website type things, do YouTube type things? Because the task it sounds so difficult to me. Like recording one little YouTube video, I think is so challenging, just to try to get everything to a level where you're acceptable, or excuse me, that you feel is acceptable to pass out, and that you're happy with. And man, like an entire CD sounds just like such a big deal to do. Did you ever have that thought?
That's something that actually I was thinking about. I was kind of hoping that you would ask about, actually. I'm sort of old-fashioned in that I like the idea of albums. I like how you organize pieces into a set, very much the same way you'd organize a performance or a recital. I think there's also an artistic element to that of the pacing, what piece you put where and why, especially in percussion when we're dealing with so many different timbres, so many different types of pieces. It took an awful lot of thought, an awful lot of experimentation kind of over probably the past 9 months or so as I was practicing these pieces of what I was going to play, what order it was going to be in. So I'm certainly a fan of not just listening to one piece. I mean, even though it seems to be that's the way that most people listen to music these days. Certainly in the case of the Beatles, you could take an album like Sgt. Pepper's. I think any song off of that certainly can stand by itself. But if you listen to the entire album, you get that context and you get the contrast between each track. And that's something that's just as much of a part of the artistic process for me. I was the composer on a couple of those pieces, but it wasn't a CD of all of my pieces, but a level of artistic input that I have, just like when you're planning a recital, is, which chorus of the meal do you roll out when, and what effect do you want that to have on the listener. So I sort of look at it that way. I think, I would hope that any of the pieces you could listen to on their own and they would stand alone, but also if you listen to the entire CD, hopefully there'd be a separate effect there in how the pieces sort of play off of each other. The contrast, obviously I start with the percussive thing, sort of a multi thing, and then go to a really, the earpiece, which is really grooving and really minimalistic in some senses, and then go to a vibraphone piece, which is pretty atonal, then go to a marimba piece, which is not entirely atonal, but probably bitonal. I guess that would be a way to put it, but more aggressive, and then closing with a snare drum piece. So as I was thinking about it, and I wasn't doing this consciously, it was just sort of where the aesthetics were guiding me. It's almost like I start with music that is maybe a little more traditional. The Manor to the Heights, which is sort of a tribute to old school rudimental drumming, and then earpiece, which certainly has its complexities and has its sophistication, but definitely has a groove to it. And just like you're walking further out into the ocean, the pieces get a little more further out as you go. It goes into a vibraphone piece that's more atonal. And then we get the marimba again, but it's in a more distant sort of language. And then finally kind of the final frontier, which is the solo snare drum piece. So I'd like to think that each one of those pieces could function on their own and a listener could appreciate that. But there's certainly an added bonus if you can listen to the entire thing. You get a different, I guess, a different impact of what all the pieces mean played back to back like that.
So
cool.
I
Sorry,
have
go, Ben.
another thing I kind of wanted to spin off that. These are kind of what I would call like the times are changing topics. Another one, we actually had a Facebook question from Brandon Arve about this. He says, I know you've been doing some Skype teaching. Can you comment on the benefits of Skype and any drawbacks, including technical drawbacks?
Sure. I'm not a master of Skype. I'm not a master of technology. I have just kind of the layman's understanding of it, like most people. I Skype with my parents, with my kids each week. They live up in Connecticut, so that's really my only real understanding of the technology. what I started doing is in the state of Mississippi, it's a very large state, and there's an awful lot of cool percussive and music things going on in the public schools that were so spread out. And quite often, you might have smaller schools that don't necessarily have a percussion teacher. They have a band director and students that are very interested in improving. And, you know, if it's getting ready for solo and ensemble or getting ready for honor band auditions or things like that, but they don't have access to a private percussion teacher. So I sort of put that out there on the listserv for the Mississippi band directors of if anybody is interested in having Skype lessons. I gave them a very reasonable rate per half hour or per hour, and then if students wanted to double up or even triple up and do a group lesson and they sort of divide up the cost and all kind of pitched in, that's fine. I set up a PayPal account. So it was really it's cool to work with beginners or with non-university students. I think it keeps me sharp as a teacher, and also as a service to the many different percussion students that are out there in the state of Mississippi. So I would say the drawbacks I've found, and again, I haven't done a lot of it, and all I've done is, at least so far, is working on snare drum stuff. And it's me with a drum pad and them with a drum pad. The one thing that's hard is that I really can't play with them. And if there's anybody out there watching that does this, that you are able to sync that, I would love to hear from you. So basically and I can't really, especially with a younger player, I can't count them off like 1, 2, 3, 4. I just kind of have to point at them and go, okay, you play it. And then wait a second, and then I'll play it, and try to explain it like that.
Do you ever pretend like the internet froze, like just like push pause on your computer and like go get a coffee, and and then just resume? Say like, oh yeah, so did you get all that? Oh, look at that, we're out of time. Yeah, I gotta.
I'm gonna start doing that on these podcasts.
Yeah.
I do enough of that in real time with my university students. So
yeah, we got to figure out how to do that in real life. I imagine, you know.
But so I think it's something that I'm interested in continuing to do. It's just been I haven't been actively pursuing, and it's not as opposed to there are people out there that they do that as part of their job each day. They're freelance teachers or something. But I'm definitely open to learning anything else about it. I mean, I know no more about it than anybody else who has a MacBook and a drum pad. So
we've actually encountered people, other university teachers that will Skype their university lessons, or like an administration that wants people to do that. Instead of paying someone to come in, they want you to Skype your lessons. And yeah, how do you feel about that? Would you be comfortable doing that, or do you feel, no, my university students get my in-person time?
Well, I think there'd have to be a reason why I would have to Skype in with university students. I think the fact that it's my full-time job and the fact that I live here, I'm there every day, is that's what keeps me attached to coming in and doing it in real time. I think if I were to be on the road or something, maybe once a semester at the very most. I think with college it's so expensive and there's such an investment from the students that I'm very fortunate that I from time to time I get to travel, do clinics, do recitals, things like that. But usually it's maybe once or twice a semester, and I try to schedule makeup lessons. I try to actually do it live. There was one time a couple of years ago I was doing a tour where I was away for probably a week, and actually what I did, I gave them all YouTube assignments. I gave them an assignment and told them to post a private YouTube video. So it was more where they had to prepare it, and I think it worked well because it's different than what they would normally do. It was a different way of them approaching. They had to make a recording. They had to really be conscientious of making it sound good, and they got a grade based on that. And it was effective because it's different than what we do each week. I think if that became the norm, then I'm not so sure about that. I think I'm obviously paid a salary, and it's my full-time job to be there for them, not just teaching-wise, but also advising ensembles, just being there with the office door open too. Because being in any kind of teaching situation, especially with undergraduates, there's an awful lot of times, the teaching is not just about the percussion stuff. You kind of have to have the door open and be there. So, and it could be either being there to answer questions or being there to model the types of professional behaviors you want from them. So, I could see how an administration would want that if there's something preventing you from being there. If in the case of maybe a sabbatical, or if you have some kind of really cool opportunity to go out of the country or go on the road to do something that would be very important for your own promotion and tenure agenda, then yeah, that would be a special case. And certainly technology, although I don't think it's the same, would be a passable substitute. But I think when you take on a student, it's a personal thing, and good, bad, or ugly, you have to follow it all the way to the end. So
yeah, that was our feeling when the topic came up and we were told that people have done that in the past. We were like, what? How?
Yeah. Just.
But and again, I've never done it. I'm sure there are people out there who have done it. Done it successfully. For me personally, not having done it, it would be hard for me to imagine the benefit of doing that over doing it live full time. But
to me, it's funny. It seems like if someone was playing really well, if someone was doing really well in lessons, it would kind of work because you could just say, "Oh yeah, that sounds great," But also, if someone was doing poorly, I would have a harder time. I feel like lecturing over, electronic, oh, you really need to practice, let's talk about your schedule and how you can get in more time, and that's, it just it seems like it wouldn't work as well for actually the struggling student versus the one that's doing fine, that doesn't really need it as much,
Oh, sure.
Well, you can imagine the student being like, what? I can't hear you. It's not working.
The logistics alone would.
I heard about somewhere, I want to say it was University of Delaware, but I could be totally wrong with that, that their percussion juries, they actually pre-recorded their juries and just submitted a recording for their jury. And apparently other studios said, isn't that unfair because they have multiple takes and they can make their recordings perfect? And the response was, exactly, they can make their recordings perfect. So that's an interesting debate to have of,
I've heard of people Skyping in a guest a guest artist for juries. I've heard of that. I think that's cool.
Yeah, that's something different.
Yeah, so you have a regular jury setting, and then you have a laptop, and someone is being Skyped in.
Or I think especially working with composers, last semester I had Casey Skype in to my percussion ensemble rehearsal.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, I think there's two types of lessons. There's the okay, I'm going to see you for an hour and then never see you again kind of lesson. I'm going to travel to, Sweden to have one lesson with Anders Ostrand, and that's going to be my 1 hour with that person, and that's it, and that's probably going to cost a lot or whatever, or knowing him, he'd probably just take you on, but I don't know. And then there's also the 4-year lesson. So I think there's a lot of teachers who they can do one really good lesson, and that could be a Skype lesson maybe. But I think Jason was saying, your responsibility is also to have the door open and make professionals out of these people, and that takes, you can't do that in an hour. I think I even mentioned that somewhere in my interview here. I think when I was talking to the students privately as a studio, I said, it's really cool you guys are part of this process, and not a process as a student you'll get to see very often. You get to review all these different candidates, and you have this one day to pick who you like the best. That's really tough because you can see who can do one day okay, but trying to anticipate who can do 4 years okay is harder, you know.
Mhm.
So the long lesson and the short lesson, I guess, is the short of that. Hey, well, yeah, congrats on the CD. I can't wait to hear it. My track sounds awesome, and yeah, we're super excited about it. Ben, what's going on? What do you got for us today?
Yeah, so Jason went to University of North Texas. In fact, he was there at the same time as Yijin Fang, who was our guest last week. And I also went to the University of North Texas, although slightly after the two of them. So anyway, I decided that I wanted to talk about something that we could both relate on. And so when I thought about works for percussion, as far as percussion composers, one name that comes up a lot is Christopher Deane, who is an associate professor of percussion at University of North Texas, and both of us had the privilege of studying with Mr. Deane, who is a fantastic teacher, performer, and composer, which I think it's very rare to find someone that can truly do all three of those things very well. So Christopher Deane holds degrees from the University of North Carolina School of the Arts and Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. He studied percussion with James Massey Johnson, Alan Oddie of Percussion Group Cincinnati, Roland Koloff, Eugene Espino, and Leonard Schulman. He's performed with many great orchestras throughout the U.S., including the Dallas Winds, which was formerly the Dallas Wind Symphony, Boston Pops, Dallas Symphony, Minnesota Orchestra, and the North Carolina Symphony, and he was also a member of the Greensboro Symphony, among many others. He has over 70 concerto performances to his name, and in addition to all this wonderful percussion stuff, he's actually a very sound composer. He's studied extensively composition with Sherwood Schaefer, Robert Ward, Charles Fussell, and Ben Johnston. And then I did not know this until doing my research. He also served as like a percussion consultant for several years for George Crumb. So yeah, he's quite involved in the composition world. His first kind of success was he wrote a piece, marimba solo called Etude for a Quiet Hall. And there's a 1997 Percussive Notes article that's an interview with him, and he talks about he submitted it to the PAS composition contest, which Lee Howard Stevens was a judge for, and he said it's not a flashy piece, it's kind of meditative, it's not going to go anywhere, and he said he just kind of forgot about it, and then sure enough, a few months later he heard back that he had won, that Lee Stevens had chosen his piece as the winner, and he said that was really like a kind of pivotal point in his career as a composer. And then 10 years later, actually, in 1992, he received the second prize for his marimba solo, Three Shells. So, yeah, he's a PAS award-winning composer. Since then he's had commissions from the University of Oklahoma, the Percussive Arts Society, Berklee College of Music, and the University of Kentucky for various solo and ensemble works, just to name a few. There are certainly several others he's been commissioned by. And in the period he was working with George Crumb, this is one of my favorite things, he played his composition Morning Dove Sonnet for George Crumb, and George Crumb called it one of the greatest vibe pieces I've ever heard, and he called Deane the Paganini of the vibraphone. So that's quite some compliments from one of the best composers of the 20th century and beyond. So Mr. Deane has approximately 36 works for percussion, solo, and chamber music. Josh Smith wrote a dissertation from the University of North Texas on his vibraphone pieces. There are 3 major vibraphone works from Mr. Deane, and Josh in his dissertation has a list of a few of it, of I think most of the compositions to date, but that was around 2006, so there have certainly been several others. As far as I know, his best works are, of course, Etude for a Quiet Hall, which we talked about before, Morning Dove Sonnet, which is a vibraphone solo where it has a lot of extended techniques. This is the one that George Crumb was such a fan of, including you have to play with 2 bows and 2 mallets at the same time. So you have to hold 1 bow and 1 mallet in each hand, 2 bows and 2 mallets at the same time. So 1 bow and 1 mallet in each hand. And then in addition to that, you have to play bend pitches on the vibraphone with like a Becker Blue type mallet, and play harmonics. There's all sorts of extended techniques in this piece, imitating a bird call. And he uses the harmonics to extend the range of the vibraphone past what's conventionally there. The next kind of big work that I think of that is very commonly performed of his is Process of Invention, which is a marimba solo. It has a lot of kind of speeding up and slowing down the same theme in both hands, but at different rates. It's a very challenging piece to learn. It's about 15 minutes long. It was written originally for Mark Ford, and yeah, it's a great piece. It's very long and very difficult though because of it. And then the last kind of major work that I think gets performed a lot is Vespertine Formations from 2003, which is a marimba quartet, which also involves making some special mallets for it. But Vespertine Formations kind of imitates birds flocking, and you hear these, sort of trailing effects. And then a few of my favorites that aren't as commonly performed that I think people should definitely check out. And Jason, you probably know the first one. It's called The Bones of Trang Tzu, which was written for Yijin Fang. It's a timpani solo. Were you around for that?
No, I played on the premiere of Vespertine Formations with Yijin, but I think that might have been because she was at UNT a little bit after me, or she stayed a little bit longer than me. So I think that happened after.
Yeah, it was written in 2002, and it involves you have to play on one timpani stick with the other while still playing on the head, if that makes sense. So it sounds like bones clicking together. And it was written, I think, Yijin and Mr. Deane have the same birthday, different years, but the same date. So I think it was a birthday present for Yijin from Mr. Deane. And then the next less common one that's one of my favorites that I've performed is called A Robe of Orange Flame, which is
it's a
half-hour long Thunder Sheet solo of all things. Which when I heard that, I thought like that sounds kind of comedic, but it's not at all. It's a very serious work with it's for spoken voice and Thunder Sheet. And it's narrating. It's the story of the Buddhist monk that self-immolated during the Vietnam War era. So it's a very, very profound and kind of chilling piece. And then the last piece I want to talk about of the Ben Charles's favorites is it's a piece called The New Rube Goldberg Variations, which was premiered at PASIC this past year. And there's a full YouTube recording of that one. I think it's about 12 minutes long. The piece it's based on the idea of a Rube Goldberg machine, which is the very complicated machine to do a very simple task, like when you have like dominoes that fall and it hits a switch and something, and ultimately it turns on the water.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my Christopher Deane highlight reel right there. Did you guys have any other pieces or experiences with these pieces?
Hey, Jason, did you happen to go to his little talk at this last PASIC?
I actually couldn't go to PASIC this past year.
Okay. Yeah, me either.
Unfortunately. So, I missed that. I was going to add, the thing I like about Deane's pieces is I've always thought, like, when he writes a new piece, not only does he write a new piece, he sort of reinvents the instrument when he writes a piece. Like you look at Vespertine Formations. I mean, that's a reinvention of how a marimba quartet is conceived, like with the brush mallets. You think about Etude for a Quiet Hall, very different. Morning Dove Sonnet, like each piece is sort of a new take on how the instrument is used, and like almost in a Stockhausen type way, where with Stockhausen, each time he wrote a new piece, he basically invented a new language with which to write that piece.
Yeah.
And Deane, as far as how the instruments are used, it's not only is he writing a new piece of music, but he's writing in a new way. He's conceiving the instruments or the instrumentation in a new way. even in a piece like Process of Invention, which is my all-time, or one of my all-time favorite marimba solos, I think the fact that he goes back to the marimba as a percussive instrument, it's a very rhythmic piece. And I think the reason that it works, and you can almost compare it to like a lot of the music by Daniel Levitan, is that he's not thinking of the marimba as sort of a wooden piano or wishing it was something that it wasn't. He actually kind of approaches it like a percussive instrument and lets the rhythm carry the melodic ideas.
Yeah.
So,
or likewise, like to contrast that, like Morning Dove Sonnet is so lyrical. It's like it's rare, when we think vibraphone, so often we think jazz, and it's so lyrical and slow and open and ringy, which is actually what the vibraphone does very well, I think.
Sure. I think too. I've told him this, that there should be a Facebook group called like people that would be working at gas stations if it was not for Christopher Deane. Like there's so many of us that as a teacher, and he's what was a cool thing about that percussion department there is that all of the different teachers, all of the different personalities, all with different sensibilities. That's a real strength to that place where, I got things from Mark Ford that I could only get from Mark Ford. I got things from Christopher Deane I could only get from Christopher Deane. And, and so on and so forth. I mean, you could go through the whole faculty there like that. But, yeah, I mean, as far as teachers and people that are very giving of their time, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find many more like him.
I have to say, the only bad thing about that is he's such a humble, nice person that he's not in music for the profits of it all. And so many of these great pieces go unpublished and don't get played enough because of it. And
they really
I've
only
been begging him for some of these pieces to be published.
So.
Yeah. Jason, did you take any composition lessons from Deane?
No. I'm trying to think. The only thing I did, I would kind of been like the stuff that eventually became Lonely City Suite. I assembled that towards the end of my time there, and eventually like worked up the nerve to play it for him. And I was really nervous about it, and but I didn't take any lessons. And I was just really conscious about being like, or being really self-conscious about being, another guy who plays an instrument. Therefore, he thinks he can compose for that instrument. I'm not saying that those people don't exist that don't do it well. I mean, there's certainly people who do it very well. You're sitting next to one of them right now.
Oh, thanks. That's too kind.
But I didn't want it to be like, yeah, he plays the snare drum, and he's has an orchestral background, and guess what? It's just a coincidence. He's writing for snare drum now, So I was very self-conscious about it, and I didn't even think about getting it published. And actually, a funny story is when I first played it, I played it on a percussion departmental at North Texas, and I actually used a pseudonym for the composer's name because I was so self-conscious about it. And I just thought it was just going to be fun to play. I've just been writing this thing. I kind of started working on it when I was at NEC just for fun. And I said, okay, I kind of put this thing together. It's always been an idea of mine. God's honest truth, no intention at all of having it published. And I played it, and I kind of swore Christopher Deane to secrecy that he wouldn't tell people it was actually me. And then
it was written by Mark Ford.
Yeah, right. No, but a funny story was, the thing with, I tell my kids, like my children at home, I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. The thing about lying is, once you tell one lie, you have to keep lying, and it just gets worse and worse. So
you gotta
a friend of mine, actually, Eric Willie, wanted to play the piece on one of his DMA recitals. So I told, it's like, so now we can't say that was actually me. So he's taking lessons with Mark Ford, playing this snare drum solo that's actually written by me, but under the name of like this made-up person. And so like he's taking lessons with Ford, and Ford's giving him all this insight and input about the piece. And and then yeah, it was weird. It was, people were asking me, where could they get it? Is it available on Steve Weiss? And it was all, and it was never my intention, and that's not any kind of false humility. It's just I was actually really self-conscious about being like another percussionist who thinks he can compose. And there are those that did study composition formally who have a lot of great things to say. I was not one of those. I just had an idea and sort of went with it. But then I got confident enough with it. In 2006, I eventually sent it off to Tapspace Publications, which is a company I'd been following for a while. And they were one of the first companies to sort of do the web thing very well, with recordings and videos and online content, where me being a teacher in Mississippi, especially back in the early 2000s, if you can't get out to see a lot of concerts, you really want to know what it is you're buying and if it can work for you or work for your students. So that was something I really felt strongly about with their company, and it was a small enough sort of a boutique type company where I felt it would be special if I could be involved with them. But I felt confident enough, having played it for all those years, where even if they wrote back to me and they rejected it, and even if Jim Casella himself called me on the phone and said, "Jason, your piece sucks and you suck," I don't ever want to hear anything again from you again, I'd be okay with it, because it had passed muster with me. But then, but the whole composer thing, I don't necessarily consider myself a composer, because it's very rarely that I carve time out of my day to sit down and compose. It's just I get an idea once every few years. It's an idea that maybe hadn't been done before, and it starts with that saying, wouldn't it be cool if? Wouldn't it be cool if there was a concert snare drum solo that sort of had all these techno beats in it? Like at NEC, I was playing a lot of De La Clue, and my roommate at the time had an Aphex Twin CD. It's like, wow, that kind of sounds a lot like the stuff I'm doing on snare drum. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a piece that did that? And just like with From the Manor to the Heights, wouldn't it be cool if you could do sort of an old-timey rudimental thing with a bass drum and a snare drum? So whenever I get that question, wouldn't it be cool if, and nobody else has done it, and nobody else has done it better than I think I could do it, I go about doing it. And then if it leads itself into any kind of publication or being disseminated out to other people, that's cool too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever want to just take Monograph 4 by Richard Gibson and just put your name on it and submit it to a publisher and see if they'll publish it because they don't know any better? I kind of want to do that. See what.
That was my second solo. It was kind of like in the 90s. It was kind of like Yellow After the Rain, Monograph 4. It was like the Yellow After the Rain follow-up piece.
See, I wanted to do that too, but I skipped to Frogs. I was advanced.
Whoa. I know.
Should we do? Let's do Laurel's bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, actually, first I have a question. Since we just spent so much time talking about North Texas, and I know you also went to NEC, which Casey and I know well because we lived in Boston for a few years. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you a question along the lines of being conscientious of what you would get from each school, because at first glance, what you get from NEC percussion department is different from what you get from UNT, and as you were studying from undergrad all the way through, was it kind of this trail of I want to do this, and now this is interesting, so I'll go over here, but now I want to do that, so I'll go here, or did you have this clear idea of what you wanted to do? If you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure, and this is a question that I get from my students sometimes, where they're trying to figure out a path, and that's a big thing, especially for younger people and older people too. But you guys went to Boston Conservatory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. On the Fenway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Awesome. So I don't know, like just kind of the brief. I don't want to get too self-indulgent here, but I started off. I went to the University of Connecticut for my bachelor's degree, and that was really the right school for me at that time. And it was a large university with a smaller music department, a smaller percussion studio, and it was a great place to go in there and really have to do an awful lot of things right off the bat. I was working on my harmonic minor scales, and Jeff Renshaw, the wind ensemble conductor, comes over and passes out the parts to a Joseph Schwantner piece. So it was a great opportunity where if there were 5 people in the percussion studio, you were doing things probably you had no business playing, but it was a good way to kind of get in and start doing that. I got interested in orchestral percussion during my time at UConn, obviously living a couple hours from Boston. The New England Conservatory was certainly appealing to me in terms of the people who were able to go into orchestral careers directly from that school. So I was fortunate to audition and be selected to go there. And I don't know if I ever had one thing in mind that I wanted to do. I think I just wanted to be around the best people, because playing percussion, playing music isn't something that comes natural to me. I think I'm just as likely to have become an accountant or a plumber or something like that. It's just I think percussion is the thing I happen to choose to do, and I happen to kind of get my work ethic and order based around that. I kind of found my tribe with other percussionists. But I think it was important to me to go and be around the best players possible. And with an interest in orchestral music, it was very important to go to the source of that knowledge. If I was going to learn orchestral music, I wanted to learn it from people who were doing it every single night. If I'm learning Porgy and Bess, I'm learning it from Will Hudgens, who plays it with the Boston Symphony. Not somebody who had read an article on it. So it was very important for me to pursue music in that way. I learned an immense amount there. I was not the best player there, not by a long shot. And I learned just as much from my fellow students there. Guys like Ed Steffen, Thomas Goldberg, Randy Johnson, Chris DiChiara, Aaron Trant. I got there a couple of years after Ted Atkatz had been there. So just being out in the hallway outside of the practice room and taking note of what the other players were doing and going, wow, okay, I just learned a whole lesson's worth of material from listening to these other guys play, in addition to, of course, studying with Will Hudgens, who is one of my favorite teachers. I think in my own teaching, I often hear his voice coming out, just in his ability to make something very, very clear.
If I could interject real quick.
I'm sorry, man.
Sorry, I just want to interject real quick. We were talking earlier about Skype teaching, and that's one thing I tell my students, you could be at home on a practice pad, and, we could Skype from my place to yours, but I think that's one of the reasons it's so valuable to actually come to school, is you do have those run-ins with your peers, and just like Jason was saying, I think I learned, especially in my undergrad, every bit as much from my peers as my teachers.
Oh, yeah, of course. And so at the end of my 2 years there, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I've been taking auditions and kind of making some progress there. Not the kind of progress I think where I was going to win a major orchestral job. I had other interests as well, though, too. I kind of grew up doing the marching thing, did drum corps, got an opportunity around that time to go and teach drum corps, which had kind of been a dream of mine, so I got to go off and do that. So I felt after I left NEC, what I needed was an opportunity to round myself out, because I felt that for me to have a career in percussion, I wasn't going to be the guy who was going to win the big audition. You know, I was going to be the guy who maybe was able to do a little bit of everything at a good level, and I was able to sort of be a jack of all trades like that. And so I met my future wife, and she was living in Denton, Texas at the time. She had gone to North Texas, and she was teaching in Denton in the public schools, and we met, and I was sort of hanging out in Boston, freelancing and teaching here and there, but really needing, I felt, another few years of practice room time before I'd feel comfortable really applying to anything full-time or serious. So it was sort of serendipitous, I think, like we met, she's in Denton, I started talking to Christopher Deane and Mark Ford on the phone, and the stars kind of aligned. I think my future was kind of calling me to move down to Denton. So I did that, and I felt like I'm very fortunate in that I went to the right schools at the right times for me. NEC was great because it showed me the absolute highest standard of playing, and it also taught me what a really good sound is. Like not just playing the snare drum, but playing the snare drum extremely well. Not just having good time, but having really good time, or being really active. Like, not just practicing a couple hours here, here and there, but pulling an 8-hour day. I learned those skills, but for me, I needed those 3 years at North Texas to not only put those into practice in the practice room, but also start learning a lot of other lessons. Like from Christopher Deane, who was able to coach me on orchestral repertoire, but also expose me to chamber music, new music, sort of answer some of those artistic questions and concepts that in the trade school-like environment sometimes at a place like NEC can be, I wasn't necessarily getting into that type of dialogue as much. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, you're at NEC for 2 years, there's excerpts to learn and auditions to take, and I have to get from point 0 to point 10 within those 2 years. So in addition to that, my lessons with Mark Ford, in addition to learning a lot of marimba, learning a lot of musical ideas, the concepts on how to get a position in higher education, that was pivotal for me. I had no idea about any of that coming out of my master's degree. So getting to learn from him, and that was a time in the early 2000s where there were perhaps more university positions open at that time, and I was able to even, I think I was like 26 years old, not even a third of the way done with my doctorate, and I was able to go on a number of interviews my first year, and just to get that experience, and combined with being a TA at North Texas, having a load of maybe 10 or 15 undergraduate students there that I could use as a lab. Of course, with the North Texas curriculum, so I wasn't completely on my own. I was able to kind of test the waters. And just like you practice your percussion you're playing, to have students every week to teach, that's almost like a practice room to learn how to teach. You can take a class on percussion, you can read a book on how to play percussion, but it really doesn't, you don't start to get better until you put the hours in of doing it, not doing it well, self-analyzing, going back to the drawing board. So with all of those opportunities, I was able to kind of come up with a career that involves a wide facet of things, that when it came time to interview at a place like Mississippi State University that requires an awful lot of things of me, concert percussion, I play and teach drum set there, which is something in Denton, Texas. I would have never have shown my face there playing drum set, but being a small town like Starkville, Mississippi, I could play drum set and improve and teach drum set, as well as being involved with the drum line here. So, I think it's without being too long-winded, it was the right schools at the right time for where I was. That's not saying it's right for everybody, but based on what I've gotten to know about myself and my personality, I'm very thankful for how those things kind of laid out in my life.
That's perfect, because that covers exactly one of our Facebook questions from Paul Millette, which talks about the two different programs. So thanks so much, Paul, for that question.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah, and it looks like we also had a question about Skype somewhere, which we talked about.
That's Brandon Arve.
Oh, right. Oh, Ben said that. Yeah, so thanks so much, Brandon, for the question. Hey, here's a quick question. I think it really goes to Ben. Hey, Ben, Ted Jackson wants to know how he gets a Percussion T-shirt.
We should give those away as a prize for asking who asked the most questions, which I think Ted Jackson might.
Which is probably.
I think it's Ted. I think Ted. I think the answer is email Ben and say, where's my shirt? Hey, so Laurel, what book do you have to share with us today?
Yeah, I will make this quick because I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. But something that musicians have to do a lot that we maybe don't think about so much is we do have to write.
Right.
Yeah, like words, not notes. And we're talking about your CD at the beginning of the episode, Jason, and you mentioned a grant from the Mississippi Arts Commission. So of course you have to write for that. And interestingly, when Casey and I were in Australia just a few weeks ago, I was distraught because I left my book on the plane on the way to Sydney, and then we get to the apartment where we're staying, and there's this cabinet full of books, and I was like, glorious, this is wonderful. And inside was a book called How to Write to Win by a guy named Tony Baker, and it's like a tiny book, and it's not too long, and I read the whole thing.
Relation?
What?
Tony
He's my cousin.
Oh,
Baker.
Baker, that's right. Yeah. I didn't even think about that. Anyway, I read the whole thing in about a day, and it was actually really interesting. So I didn't know who Tony Baker was, but he's this award-winning journalist and also a writing consultant and does ads and PR for various things. But he wrote this book called How to Write to Win, and kind of by definition, his premise is like you want to write something that's going to go to this large group of people who probably don't have an expert knowledge, and once they read whatever it is you write to them, you want them to do what you want them to do. And how do you get that to happen? And so I was really kind of hooked by this, like, I want people to give me grant money. How do I get them to do that? Or, we have to write cover letters for jobs, and we want them to give us an interview, or you have to write a press release because you want them to come to your concert to review it. And so I thought it really applies to what we're doing, and he has just a few tips. I think I came up with, 4 basic tips after reading the book that he mentions. Number 1, always write to an audience, no matter what. So this isn't just like, dear hiring committee, boop-a-doop-a-doo. He says, no, actually imagine a person, like you're actually just sitting down and talking as we are now. What would you say? And write that. And of course you might have to tweak it because we don't write the same way that we speak, but who are they? Just talk to them, and what do you want them to do? Always make sure that you know what you want someone to do as you're writing. Number 2, he says, avoid superfluous adjectives. Number 3, read your writing. Don't just look at it on a screen. And perhaps most importantly, delete anything unnecessary. So he spent a lot of time talking about how when we write, we tend to get really, really long-winded, and we'll say the same thing over and over, but in just 8 different sentence structures. And I know I can be guilty of that if I don't really revise things and look at it I'll be super duper long-winded.
I don't know if you guys do anything like this. At FAU, the music department requires our students to write what they call an artist statement for their juries. Do you guys have anything like that?
No.
It's not a required part of our juries, and it's of course up to us. It's up to the studio teacher here to just do what they want to do. We did do something at Concord at our old gig, where the theory and history teacher wanted to see something in their jury, like a jury paper about their rep to kind of train them to write program notes. And
so basically, what I tell my students is, your artist statement should demonstrate an enhanced understanding of the piece. So you might want to talk about, the technique you're using if you're playing like a marimba etude, or you might want to talk about the composer if you're playing, Beethoven timpani excerpts or whatever. Just some sort of background behind the notes that you're playing. And it's funny, like reading them, exactly what Laurel just said about cut out all the excess stuff in there. And so many times, like the first sentence of these artist statements is like, today I'll be playing Polaris by Mark Ford. It's like, I know you're writing about it. You don't need to tell me you're playing it.
Mark Ford was born in Indiana.
And it's like there's so much like, either irrelevant or repetitive information that some people get in there. So yeah, it's really just cut to the chase. And there's an art to communication, I think, of saying as much as possible with as few words as possible.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, and sorry, we're like diving and cutting your topic short almost because we're already talking. Yeah, but it seems like we've been trained. I know in high school it's like, okay, you have to write this thing that you don't want to write, and it has to be this many pages. So the whole goal was just like get through the pages. And I mean, I can't even count how many papers I had to write like that. It was just like paper after paper after paper after paper, where basically all you're learning to do is fill space. But then you're exactly right. Like that's what I saw over and over and over and over. I mean, even in our music appreciation course that we used to teach, it was so often the same thing. I mean, we'd have these fabulous papers by some people, and then these other papers that just clearly they're just trying to take up the space and feel like they did some work.
Especially when it's like, I mean, if you're required to write an 8-page paper. Like, yeah, if you're not interested, you're probably going to have filler. But if it's a 1-page thing, like, everything you say, like, that's not that much. Everything you say should be, like, super information dense and relevant.
Yeah, and on this exact topic, Tony Baker in the book notes 2 times in history when that was practiced, this whole 1-page thing. And one was Winston Churchill, when he, would receive numerous memos, like insurmountable numbers of memos. He said they have to fit on one side of an A4 piece of paper. If it doesn't fit that way, you have to fix it to where I can just look at it and know what you mean. And of course, this is Winston Churchill dealing with things at a time when there's so much more to talk about than just like Handel's oratorios and things like that. And the other example was the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is actually only 268 words, yet it's something that everybody remembers. And I remember I had to memorize it in 8th grade history, and I would recite it, but I think I'll mess it up, so I'm not gonna.
That speech in that movie Independence Day is pretty short. It's like a paragraph. It's really good.
Jason likes it. Jason likes it.
Great movie.
Yeah.
It was a good speech.
Anyway, yeah, so point number 3 from Tony Baker and his tips about writing is to get rid of all your unnecessary words. And I would argue that composers could think of the same thing. Get rid of your unnecessary stuff. Don't take 9 minutes to tell me something when it could take 2.5 and be glorious.
Laura loves that piece I wrote with the metronome that you play. And it's like 12 minutes too long.
Casey?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Ben. Yeah. For 15 minutes. That is too long. That is definitely too long. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's like my little soapbox thing. But the final, let me get through this. Yeah. The final tip that he has, which Jason has also kind of already said, is never ever lie.
That's one of the tips.
That's one of his. He actually says it. Never lie. Which
Don't do it.
Yeah. That's what he says.
I want to try a different tactic, like apply for a job and just lie like crazy. Like I played with Yo-Yo Ma. I taught Yo-Yo Ma, even though this is a percussion job. And just see what I bet it could be okay. Let's see. It is true though. I'm glad you said you have your students write something. It just seems like such a. There were times where I was teaching and I just went like, wait a minute, time out. I can't handle this anymore. You need to know the difference between the different forms of two. TWO is one thing, TOO is another thing, and TO is another. Just like, how are you in college type of thing. But yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, and you make that mistake, so, like in a grant proposal or a cover letter, it's gone. I know I wouldn't keep reading. It's like you want to teach college people and you don't know the difference between those three words. I don't think so.
I think too. Also preparing for what students are going to do, maybe both in their professional lives and maybe as graduate students. Something we have them do at MSU, like at the end of their sophomore year, they do what's called a sophomore barrier, and they have to write a paper that goes along with that. There's certain requirements, and I try to tell them that you have to think about it like someday if you submit an article to Percussive Notes, or something more immediate, like if you're going to go out into the public schools and try to get some private students, if you're going to play for a bunch of middle schoolers or high schoolers, being able to organize your thoughts about a piece of music, and so that way I have them write the paper, but then they also have to do a presentation based on it, and I have them actually do it in sort of a clinic format where they're not just standing there reading a paper, maybe like you'd see at an academic conference, but being able to take that information and being able to present it in a sort of informal way where they're playing and talking and it seems more natural. So I think if there's a way to sort of tie that into what they're going to be doing either down the road or in the more immediate future, then that's helpful.
I just want to say that my students are probably very upset with you right now because I'm going to make them do that now.
Oh sure. Well, I found too, that's the hardest thing is for music students to talk about music, not like they're music students, but like they're actually internalizing it.
Yeah.
Like I'll have I'm teaching percussion methods this spring, and for all of the students there on their first day of class, I asked them who their favorite composer is, and it seems so unnatural for them to talk about music or talk about something like this, like they're not being graded on it. So taking something, even if it's academic, even if it's something they had to put down on paper, but internalizing it in a way that they can be very conversational about it.
Oh, thanks. When I taught music history at the last university, I made them give little presentations every day where they had to talk about some little bit they read. So we would divvy up the chapters, and everyone was responsible for all the content, but they were responsible to present on a small portion, because I think it's so hard for people to talk about music and get up and say something, and especially something meaningful.
So what Casey's saying is, because it's difficult to talk about music, instead of teaching a class, he had the students teach the class.
Yeah, dude, it worked so well. I put on those glasses with the fake eyes that are open, and I just slept. It was so easy. Easiest job I've ever had. I have to say, here at JMU, I've been so happy. The students write really well. I've been amazed. Like every email I've gotten has been just like, oh, it's so nice. We had a YouTube troll some weeks ago, and it didn't bother me so much about this person complaining about what they were complaining about, but it bothered me that they were bragging about their doctorate degree and using just hellacious, horrible grammar at the same time and sounding like a child. I mean, literally, it was just embarrassing. I have a screenshot I'll show you someday. But but that's what really irked me about it. It's like, wait a minute, you're making our field look so bad when you're bragging about your doctorate and writing like this. Like, you cannot write like that. And if you are, I mean, fine, write like that, but say like, hey, I'm like 12 and I don't know any better. It's like, dude, you have like the terminal degree in our field? No, like this, you do not do that. And I mean, of course, I didn't censor it or take it down or anything, but I was just so mad that it's like, no, you cannot be bragging about your doctorate and this is the presentation we're looking at,
Well, it tips me off when they miss the Oxford comma. they miss that, then I can tell that they're on the wrong path.
Wrong path.
Yeah. Yeah, like, let's eat grandma. Yeah.
That's one of those things, maybe 5 years ago I wouldn't care about, but I mean, maybe I'm showing my age or something now. Yeah, the Oxford comma now for me is like what using the hyphen for plural was for me. Like if you see that, like you see the plural with the hyphen in there, like that just tells you a whole bunch about a person.
You mean the apostrophe?
Yeah, that's what I mean. The hyphen, trying to sound all elitist.
You have a DMA, Jason. You have a DMA, Dr. Baker.
Jeez. Okay, an apostrophe. Sorry. Yeah, it's like the apostrophe. Yeah, we
Mark Ford taught him that.
We'll edit that out, right? So, yeah, like the apostrophe, and like you'll see it on business signs too, and it's like, what's the world coming to? Jeez.
Yeah.
But now I've gotten older and even more crotchety and more elitist. I view it the same way with the Oxford comma. So.
Yeah, one more thing on Oxford comma. One of my favorite examples is like from a book, and it said, "I would like to thank my parents, God and Wonder Woman." It's supposed to be, I would like to thank my parents, God, and Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did read. I don't know who votes on this, but there was some vote by the Grammatical English Professorship of Language that approved the singular they for usage.
The Nagy Grammar Committee?
Which is like something that has been extremely exhausting as a teacher to deal with, because you get a student that writes a paper like, when somebody plays marimba, they should something, and you've had to correct them for so long, but now it is officially accepted for everybody out there writing papers.
I still don't like it.
You can not like it, yeah, but it's okay now.
As Casey, Laurel, Ben, and Jason talk about first world problems.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the thing that bothers me in this world is the Oxford comma. Of all the problems out there.
I'm with Ted Jackson. There's not enough at Percussion shirts floating around. Ben, you need to do your job a little bit.
Sorry.
Hey, you guys, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to everyone for the Facebook questions. We kind of answered them indirectly today, but Will Marinelli, Ted Jackson, Paul Millette, Brandon Avery, thanks very much Brandon RV, thanks very much for the questions. Hey, Jason, last question. When's the CD coming out?
Hopefully no later than February 1st. So it's all edited and done now. Usually the turnaround time for the manufacturing is not very long at all, and then within a week or so after that, it'll be up on iTunes and other outlets like that. So
Awesome. Well, congrats again, Ben. Thanks so much for the segment. Great job as always. And thank you, Laurel, and we'll see you guys really soon. And catch you next time, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.